So I managed to solve the issue that I was facing before. So just to recall, I was facing this issue. I was logging through Cloudera, and this user did not have write access. It only had read access, and when I was trying to create a directory, it was giving me an error saying that permission denied, and user Cloudera access right doesn't have it because it only has the HDFS user has the right access. So I searched around and then I found this answer on Stack Overflow. So hopefully this might help someone else out there. So what I did is basically, if you go to the machine, virtual machine, uh, you go to Cloudera Manager, and within Cloudera Manager you go to HDFS, and we go to configuration, and within the configuration you see this advanced configuration, and within this advanced configuration you see this HDFS site egg.xml. You basically add a variable saying DFS permissions enabled, and that is false. So this now won't be checking permissions before writing some files. It won't see which user created which file, and then you need to restart HDFS after you do that. So this basically solved my first problem. And when I did that, the next thing I tried to do is basically I could now do do the same thing, and the error that I was getting before I was not getting now, but it was saying that now the new error came. So the error was cannot create directory, employees name node is in save mode. Now I again googled this error, and then this is the command that I got, and I ran this, and it's basically Hadoop DFS admin minus save mode leave. So it turned off the save mode, and now I could basically create my directory. So if now just to confirm whether directory is created or not, let's do a Hadoop fs minus ls, and as we can see we have this employee directory created. So now we are good to go. So the next step will be basically to transfer the whole database. So this is the first group job that we'll be seeing. So to transfer the database, we need to import all the tables, and this is basically being mentioned here. So we can say sqoop import all tables. This is one of the parameters that I needed to use for the Hortonworks sqoop 2. This is the driver, and this is basically the connection string. The connection string is quicksort.cloudera3006, and the database that we want to import, the username password, and we also need to give the warehouse dir. So the warehouse dir is basically where we want to import. So I want to import with an employee, and M is 2. So what is M? M is the number of mappers that the sqoop should use to import the tables. And when we run this command, what sqoop does is basically it divides the task into different threads. Now here the number of threads will be 2. So you might have one question, how to decide the number of threads, right? Now this is totally on the data. If you have small data, even doing one is suffice. If you have large data, then you have to accordingly change the value. I think by default the value is 4. So let's go ahead and run this job. Let's see what happens. So the job is running. Hopefully this should run. Okay, I think some error is coming up. It's saying retrying connect to server 000. Okay, there's some error. What I will do is I'll remove this thing. So it looks like trying to connect to something at A032 and it's not able to do that. What I'll do is basically I'll pause the video and then connect back when I have solved this issue. So I solved the issue. The issue was my yarn client was not running. So what I did is basically I went to the yarn client and then ran this thing. Then some other issue, but still running. So now we can see that now my query is running. Couple of things to note here is this thing, the bounding query. So bounding query is you know how the threads are running. So this job has run, and as you can see, it's transferred around 17 MB of data in 30 seconds, right? And it retrieved around 443308 records from the employees table and put into the employees folder within on HDFS. So let's see some of the things. One of the things that we need to see is the bounding belts query. So this is how the threads are decided. So for example, what it does, it select the minimum employee number and the maximum employee number. So that the minimum is 1, the maximum is 10. Now what it will do is basically it will divide 10 into two groups, because we have the number of splits or the number of mappers that we have given as 2. It will divide this into two parts, and then each of the threads will import the data into something called a temporary table. And when the data is is the whole data is imported, then only is actually written to the directory that we have asked for. Before that, it's only into the temporary table. And we can see that this is the yarn manager, yarn client, that was not able to connect before, and that's why it was giving the error. And then it started the map reduce job. So now this job is created, and then the job is run to import all the data. So let's go ahead and then see what we have imported. So Hadoop ls fs minus ls slash employees. So we can see that we have departments, department EMP, department manager, employees, salaries, and title, and it created an employees directory as well. So this employees are the database name, and these are the tables that we imported. Now let's see the data in one of the tables. Okay. I actually I made a mistake. So what we need to do is basically, so one thing we need to keep in mind is okay, so one thing we need to keep in mind is whenever we are doing a list or ls, if there is a D, this is a directory. If it's not a D, then it's a file. So it actually imported everything inside the employees tape folder that we created. There was no other folder, there was no more employees folder that was created inside it. So as we can see, that we want to see the files created within employees and departments, and it created two files. And this it created two files. Why? Because we had two mappers to run this task, right? And there's a success file. So this success file is only created when the data transfer is successful. Otherwise, no data will be written on Hadoop. Now let's see the data that has been written, and then we use -cat for that. it actually loaded the data for us. You can see this is the exact same thing. So if we go to MySQL, so it's exact same thing that we see here. So D00 on marketing, and when we import in uh, Hadoop, the default delimiter is a comma. So we can see D001 comma marketing and so on and so forth. So let's exit from here. Now we can also use some other compression codecs. The compression codecs are nothing but like when we transfer data, it will compress the data in a certain format, and there are different formats. So I think the default format is something. Now what we're trying to do is basically we're trying to use snappy codec as a compression format. So let's run this. And what we'll do is basically we'll create a hide table and then it overwrite if it exists. So I'm just checking if there are any errors. So it will now create the hive table. Something, an error came, unsupported codec. Okay, it was working. It was working on the Hortonworks. I don't know why it's not working on Cloudera version. Maybe there are some changes. I'll see into it. What are the values for the compression codec, or maybe the. So now what we'll do is basically create a hive table and import all the data into that. So this OK thing, if we have worked on hive, we'll see that whenever we run a query, it prints a OK for on the screen and then time taken. So this is the typical hive format. And when I'll cover Spark lessons, so what we'll do is basically we'll use the tables that we have stored in Hive to run our Spark queries, and it's really easy. Spark out of the box supports the tables that are on Hive. It also supports the tables on MySQL, but it's not so easy as the ones that are on Hive. So it will take some time to create the tables. What I will do is basically I'll pause the video till then. So now the data is imported. As we can see, the now hive table will be created, which we'll see shortly, and this table we can see when we log into hive. And so the employee database is now imported into hive, and now we'll say show databases. Now we'll log into hive, and then we'll say give us the databases. Okay, so now this is not correct. I don't see the database anywhere. Let's use the default database. And let's see the tables inside that. Okay, so it imported into the default database. We might need to give the database name when we are trying to import, but as we can see, it has imported all the tables from MySQL to Hive. So let's see the top 5 rows from departments, and as we can see we have the 5 rows from here. We have 9, so in the case of departments we don't have to put a limit. There are only 9 rows, and as we can see this is copied in the exact same order as it was in case of the MySQL database. So now what we did is basically we imported the the database into a Hive table. It created a Hive table. So what I'm doing, I'm just adding this thing that we ran to the script so that you guys can copy it and run this on your machine. So what we did is basically we copied the tables into the default database. So I think we might need to put a parameter somewhere that might create one database in Hive. So the next is transfer the departments table from employee database on MySQL. So now we will be just transferring one table and not the whole database. So when we do that, we just have to say import. Before we had to say import all tables, so it imported all the tables within the database. Now we'll just import one table, and the command is sqoop import, and this is the parameter that we give for sqoop2, then the connection string. And within the connection string we have to specify the database that contains that table. So here in case it's employee, the username, the password, and there's a parameter called dash dash table, and this is departments in our case. We can import the tables in multiple formats. So there's a text file format, there's a sequence file format, there's an average data format. So depending on the requirement, we can do that. Now there's a when we import a text file, it's readable, but it takes more space on hard disk. But if we do a sequence file, it will take less space. So depending on what the use case is, we should do that. And so before we import this thing, we need to create a directory here. So I will say hadoop mkdir hadoop fs. I'll just put it little on top. Hadoop fs minus mkdir slash departments. So this will create my departments folder on Hadoop, and then I need to basically then I can run this command to import all the data from the departments table. So it should run quite quickly because the departments table has only 9 records, so it's giving me an error. Let's see what the error is, and the error says that output directory already exists. Okay, so I need to remove that. So we have to make sure that this directory does not exist before. So let's see if we still have departments folder on Hadoop, and we don't have, so we successfully deleted. Now if we run the import again, it will successfully run because there is no table departments on Hadoop. So now it has started the import process, and as we can see, this is the bounding query that we just talked about. It's saying, it's looking at, okay, what is the minimum department number and the maximum department number, and we have the default split is 4, as I had told before. So this will divide into 4 parts, and then each of these threads will basically run their own MapReduce jobs, which will then import the whole table onto the Hadoop. So it's almost done. So it says retrieve 9 records. So that, if you remember from before, that is what we would like to see. So let's see what we have imported and how it has come. So since we had 4 mappers, we have 4 files here. And for viewing we need to use the -cat. So as you can see, we have the data imported here. So this we can. So the star is basically, it will copy all the records. So for example, if we just want the first one, then we have to give the whole file name. So this is how a file name is created in the sqoop import. But if you want to view the contents of all the file, we just use a star. So I hope that this is quite clear to everyone. Okay, let me copy this as well. So this is the output. The next is basically using the boundary query and selecting a particular column. So we can, let's say if the table does not has a primary key, then while running the sqoop job, it can't find on which column it has to it has to basically distribute the threads. In that case, we need to use a boundary query that will basically distribute the data among the threads. So what we will do is basically simple sqoop import the parameters and then the connection string, the username, the password, the table, employees. In this case, we are importing the target there, then the number of mappers. The boundary query is this, and the column that we want to import is this. So here we are trying to import number and first name from the employees table. So we'll check if this table exists on Hadoop or not. So ideally it should not, otherwise it will give an error. So the table name that we are trying to create is employees underscore table, and we can see that we don't have the employees underscore table on our Hadoop file system. So let's go ahead and run the query, and the query has started to run. Let's see if it runs successfully. The number of splits that we have given here is 2, so it will divide into 2 parts. So I'm not interested in knowing about the output of this program. What we want to see is basically uh, how to specify the boundary query. So the boundary query needs to be, let's say we have maybe 10,000 employees from 1 to 10,000, and we have, let's say, 10 mappers. So what we say is like select 1 to 1000 from whatever, and then what will do is basically, if we have the number of threads as 10, it will divide equal data among 10 threads, and then that can be imported. So here in this case it just imported 2 records because I only asked for importing 2 records, but again this can be changed. The next is the next thing that we'll see is the query parameter, and this is basically, let's say we want to run a specific query to import using a where clause or something like that, then we can use this. So what we're doing here is sqoop import the parameters. So this is the parameter that specifically I have to use for sqoop2, then the driver, then the connection string, then the username, the password. And in the query, what we are trying to do is we are trying to put a join between 2 tables, the employees table and the salaries table on employee number, and we are also giving a condition. So this where conditions we have to always put. This is something that is prescribed on Sqoop's website. The target there is this, basically we will say employee underscore salaries, and then we will say split by employee number, and the number of mappers is 10. So let's go ahead and run this query. The query has started to run, and what it will do is basically it will it will do the merge on the fly, and then it will at the end import the whole table, the merge table. So it's running here. Okay, it's saying column employee number in where clause is ambiguous. So it's a employee number is ambiguous. Maybe that's an error. We have to see how do I solve it. It might be an error. So it says retrieve 0 record because it was an error. Let's see if this will run. Okay, so it says output text like this. What we'll do is we'll remove employee salaries from HDFS. And now it's in remove. Let's now run the query. The query started to run, and now this is our new bonding values query. We have number of threads as 10, so this has started to run the job, and this will basically on the fly it will run the merge job. So basically there's a merge inside this query, and the conditions is basically this. So employee number, so it will use that to split the table into different parts, and then it will be imported into Hive. So now the map reduce job is started, so it had the 30% of map task is completed. So the idea is simple. What we can do is within the query parameter we can pass any SQL query, any valid SQL query, and what Sqoop will do is it will execute that SQL query on the MySQL database, and then whatever is retrieved from that SQL query is imported into Hive. So we don't need to create a temporary table and then on MySQL and then put the data into MySQL and then retrieve that. Instead we can just use this. So it said that retrieve 2844047 rows. Now the query has run successfully. Let's move to the next query. So while copying into existing location, let's say there's some new data that you need to add. So what we can do is basically we can use a append operator to append the data, append the rows. If we don't do this, then as we saw before, it will give us an error saying that the directory already exists. So by default, whenever we are trying to run a Hadoop job on anything on Hadoop, it will give an error if the directory already exists. And this is very important. Just imagine if you just ran a job for like terabytes of data, and then some other person ran a job and maybe in MBs, and it tried to overwrite the file, so all the hard work will be gone. So that's why I think the Hadoop people have basically made sure that this directory cannot be overwritten. So what we are doing right now is we are trying to import uh, uh, the, the, the employees table, the employees directory that we just saw, and we are appending, and the files terminated by is a pipe character, and the lines are terminated by a /n. So by default files are terminated by a comma in when we're trying to do by sqoop, and then the default line terminator is just a /n. So if we run this, it will now import the employees again to the employees table. So now there will double the number of records. Now keep in mind that when you run a sqoop job, it doesn't keep in mind that whether the data already exists or not. What it will do is basically whatever you're trying to add to the existing table, it will simply add to that. So the 50% of the map job is completed, 75%. And we can see that it appended to the employees directory. It retrieved around 300,000 rows, and it appended to the employees directory. Next is we'll see how to use a where clause while importing data. So we saw just the query parameter. So within the query parameter, we can put a SQL query, a valid SQL query that will run, and the data will be imported. Now we can use the where clause, and within the where clause we can specify any existing condition that only if that is very valid, the data will be imported, and the condition should be on the table that we are trying to create. So for example, what I'm trying to do right now is I'm trying to import the salaries table to salaries folder on Hadoop, and this will be split by employee number, and the where clause is basically salary should be greater than 62,000. So let's run this, and the query is running, and it should run successfully. So by default the number of splits is 4, and it will again start a map reduce job. So what it did is basically it was taking, so if for this table the employee number is the primary key, so we don't have to worry. But in case if the table does not has a primary key, then we have to give on which column it has to split. No, so not every table might have a primary key. Let's say you have a table uh, and somebody who had just started with the SQL query, they might not have created a valid table. So let's say a table without a primary key, that kind of table can exist. Obviously we should not do that, but that kind of table can exist. So as we can see, this imported all the employees that had salaries greater than 62,000, and it imported around 1.3 million records. We can also do a incremental import. So what it does is basically sqoop provides an incremental import mode which can be used to retrieve rows only newer to the some previously imported set of rows. So while using append, it appends the whole thing. It doesn't keep in mind whether you have imported something before or not. It simply appends the data. It's not smart. So what we can do is, if we have some increment in the data, we can use this increment import, and the arguments in this are check column. So it will basically specifies the column to be examined when determining which rows to import. Incremental mode, so specifies how sqoop determines which rows are new, and the values is append and last modified. And the last value, basically we can specify the maximum value of the check column from the previous import. So what we're trying to do is basically we're trying to import, and these are the parameters that we already seen. This is the connection string, the username and the password. We are trying to import the departments table, and we have the append parameter, field submitted by, line submitted by, and we are saying the check column department ID incremental append, and the last value is 7. So and out there is basically output underscore file. So whenever you run a sqoop job, it on the fly it creates Java files, and this will be run, and it will all wherever you're running this thing, it will create the files there. So instead what we can do is basically we can specify a directory in which these files should be created by sqoop, so that wherever we're working it doesn't get cluttered. So now I've given an error. It's saying unknown column department ID. So I think in the departments table, so let's see what is I think the column name is dep underscore no. I'll just confirm. Yes, the column name is dep underscore no. Let's run this again. So as we can see, this ran. Now we can basically create a hive table using sqoop. So let's import the employees database, and the hive user home is user hive warehouse. So let's see. So within user we have hive, and within hive we should have the warehouse directory. Yes, so this is by default the directory where hive, everything related to hive tables is stored. So now what we're doing is we're trying to import the whole database. So let's run this. Now it will take some time. So I'm getting a question. The question is how much time it will take to import the data from sqoop using sqoop. So the thing is, it totally depends on the size of your data and the number of threads that you're using, or the number of the m parameter that we have. It depends on both of these. So it should not take much time. It should take somewhere in minutes. You know, yes. So the next step is basically exporting the data, and this is the last thing for the sqoop job. So oftentimes we also need to export the data from HDFS table to a MySQL table, and in this case, whenever we do that, uh, that table needs to be present in MySQL, and only then with a valid schema, and only then we can export data from HDFS to MySQL. So in this case, what we are trying to do is sqoop export. So we're exporting, and the connection string we have. Uh, so we are exporting to the employee database, and the username and password that we have seen the table. So now the salaries table here should be existing on the MySQL database, and I should have a valid schema, and that corresponds to what we are trying to export. And the export directory is basically export the user hive warehouse employees db slash salaries. So this is how hives stores the data, and the input fields should be dominated by pipe character, and input field lines should be dominated by new line character, and the number of mappers should be 4. It shouldn't be a bad job, and the out there should be output files. So since this table already exists, so we don't have to do much. This job should run successfully. So let's run the query, and this query is running. While this query is running, we'll basically see the last query, and this is again export query. And what we're trying to do is we are trying to export another table departments from here, and this should basically run again. So I hope that this sqoop tutorial has been useful to you, and thank you for watching my video. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment on this on my YouTube channel, and I'll try to answer those questions bit maybe later. Thank you.